The history of the United Kingdom is like a living tapestry, woven together with migrations, invasions, and the rise of different cultures. And while it might sound like a complex mix of dates and battles, when you step back and look at the bigger picture, it's truly an incredible journey, one that's still unfolding today. So, let's dive deeper into this fascinating story, not just for the facts, but for what it teaches us about power, identity, and the human experience. The British Isles, where it all began, were home to a mysterious group of people thousands of years ago. They were known as the Beaker culture, named for the distinctive pottery they used, often thought to be used for drinking or rituals. Now, imagine a time before written history, when these people were living in a landscape dotted with standing stones, like those at Stonehenge. Little is known about them, but it's believed that they laid the groundwork for later societies. Stonehenge itself, for example, was a monumental achievement, requiring incredible teamwork and knowledge to transport massive stones from 150 miles away. It's believed to have served as a calendar, marking the summer and winter solstices, reminding us how these ancient people were attuned to nature and the cosmos. If there's a lesson here, it's that the foundations of great civilizations often start with small, seemingly mundane practices, whether it's the pottery they used or the way they observed the stars. As centuries passed, the landscape of the British Isles changed dramatically. Waves of new people arrived, the Celts among them, speaking languages that would shape the future of the region. The Brittonic, Gaelic, and Pictish peoples, although not unified, shared certain cultural elements, pagan beliefs, similar traditions, and a common language. Picture it. A world where different tribes, each with its own traditions, were separated by lush forests and rocky hills, yet all sharing this strange, unifying thread of language and belief. Then, in the 1st century AD, the Romans arrived. They didn't just conquer, they transformed. Under their rule, Britain became a province of the Roman Empire, known as Britannia. They built roads, bridges, and walls that would stand for centuries. But what's often overlooked in our history books is how the Romans didn't manage to conquer the northern tribes, the Picts, who lived in modern-day Scotland. The Romans, for all their might, couldn't quite break through the fierce resistance of these tribes, so they retreated to a fortified border, Hadrian's Wall. Think about that for a second. The Romans, the masters of the ancient world, couldn't conquer the people of what we now call Scotland. That's a story of resilience, and one that would resonate throughout history. After the Romans left, the stage was set for another wave of migration, this time from the Germanic tribes of northern Europe. The Jutes, Angles, and Saxons swept in and began settling across England. It's often easy to think of these as simple invasions, but they were also cultural exchanges. These tribes brought their language, Old English, which eventually evolved into the English we speak today. That's a lasting legacy. Every time we say father, mother, or friend, we're speaking the language of these ancient tribes. And in turn, the Britons, those who remained after the Saxons came, found themselves pushed to the fringes, migrating to areas like Wales, and even crossing the sea to Brittany in modern-day France. So, if you ever find yourself in the north of France, you're looking at the descendants of these ancient Britons. But the story didn't stop there. As the Anglo-Saxons began to settle, the idea of kingdoms took root, with 7 major ones emerging across what we now call England. The Kingdom of Wessex, for example, became particularly influential. And it's not just a name, it's part of the reason England exists today. Think of Wessex as the foundation of a new nation, one that would eventually unite the whole island. But meanwhile, in the north, what we now call Scotland was developing its own identity. The Scots, originally from Ireland, came together to form the Kingdom of Alba under King Kenneth MacAlpine, marking the start of Scotland as we know it today. The Viking Age was the next chapter, and this period is often seen as a time of conflict and chaos. Norsemen from Scandinavia raided the shores of Britain, especially Scotland, Ireland, and even England, establishing settlements in places like the Isle of Man and founding the city of Dublin. But instead of just pillaging, these Vikings became settlers and traders, leaving behind a lasting influence. For example, many of the place names in the north of England and Scotland still have Norse origins, places like York, Jorvik, for instance. But the Vikings didn't stop at raiding. They took control of large portions of England, especially in what came to be known as the Danelaw, where Viking law held sway. The English, however, weren't helpless in the face of these invaders. Under King Alfred the Great, they mounted a resistance that eventually led to the creation of a unified English kingdom. But in 1066, a new wave of conquest arrived, this time from Normandy, led by William the Conqueror. The Battle of Hastings was a defining moment. Harold Godwinson, the last Anglo-Saxon king, was killed, supposedly by an arrow to the eye, and with that, William claimed the throne. The Norman Conquest radically changed England. It wasn't just a military victory, it reshaped society, introducing feudalism, new laws, and a new aristocracy. For example, the Domesday Book, created by the Normans, was a comprehensive survey of England, listing everything from land holdings to livestock. It's almost like a medieval version of an audit, and it helped William maintain control over his new kingdom. Fast forward a few centuries, and you see England at the center of medieval power struggles, including the famous signing of the Magna Carta in 1215. King John of England, facing rebellion from his barons over heavy taxes and failed military campaigns, was forced to sign a document that guaranteed certain rights to the people. It's easy to see the Magna Carta as just a medieval document, but its principles, like the idea that even the king is subject to the law, would echo through history and become the foundation of modern democracy. The story of Wales is equally dramatic. While England was consolidating its power, the Welsh, especially under figures like Llewellyn the Great, held onto their independence for centuries. But in 1284, Edward I of England conquered Wales. This was the culmination of a long struggle, and Wales, though still proud of its unique culture and language, was formally incorporated into the English crown. Meanwhile, Scotland was fighting for its own independence. After the death of King Alexander III, Scotland was thrown into chaos, with multiple claimants to the throne. This led to Edward I of England stepping in, which sparked the Wars of Scottish Independence. The Scots, led by figures like William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, fought back fiercely. At the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297, Wallace's forces delivered a crushing blow to the English, showing that Scotland wasn't going to go down without a fight. Wallace became a symbol of Scottish resistance, and even though he was eventually captured and executed by the English, his efforts set the stage for Robert the Bruce to secure Scottish independence at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Then, in the 14th century, a new chapter in the history of the British Isles began, the 100 Years' War. England and France, both powerful nations, were locked in a struggle for dominance. It was a time of epic battles, like the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, where English archers, armed with longbows, defeated the French cavalry. But even with such victories, England couldn't win the war outright. It's a lesson in perseverance. No matter how many victories you achieve, sometimes the prize remains just out of reach. Finally, we arrive at the Tudor dynasty, a period that would change England forever. Henry VIII's break with the Catholic Church in the 1530s over his desire for a divorce fundamentally changed the religious landscape. His creation of the Church of England was more than just a personal matter. It led to centuries of religious conflict and upheaval, shaping the lives of ordinary people. And let's not forget his daughter, Elizabeth I, who stood against the Spanish Armada in 1588, defeating one of the world's greatest naval powers. England's victory marked the beginning of its rise as a global power. All of these events, wars, invasions, rebellions, and treaties, came together over centuries to form the United Kingdom as we know it today. But beyond the dates and facts, what does it all really teach us? It shows us that identity isn't static. It's shaped by conflict, by the ideas we inherit, and by the people we come into contact with. The United Kingdom's history is a tapestry of different cultures, languages, and beliefs that have woven together to create something unique. And just like the stones of Stonehenge, The history of the United Kingdom is a monument to perseverance, adaptation, and the human desire to shape the world. Every time you look at the British Isles, whether you're standing in a city or gazing out over the hills, you're witnessing the results of countless generations who shaped the world in ways we still feel today. It's a history full of drama, change, and lessons that still resonate. And that's what makes it truly worth understanding. The history of Britain, particularly during its imperial and revolutionary periods, is marked by moments of intense political upheaval, cultural exchanges, and brutal conflicts that shaped the world we know today. It's easy to get lost in the complex details of assassinations, revolutions, and colonial conquests. But what often gets overlooked are the profound lessons we can learn from these historical events, not just as points on a timeline, but as reflections of human behavior, choices, and their long-lasting consequences. One of the most dramatic and daring chapters in British history begins in the early 17th century, with a plot that became synonymous with rebellion and the fight for religious freedom: the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. Guy Fawkes and a group of Catholic conspirators aimed to assassinate King James I and the entire Parliament, hoping to end the oppressive Protestant rule. Fawkes's plot failed, but it left a lasting legacy, with November 5th now celebrated as Guy Fawkes Night, an annual reminder of the power of protest and the consequences of defying authority. The lessons here aren't just about political conflict, but about the human urge to fight for what one believes in, even if it leads to devastating outcomes. The plot might have been a failure, but it showed just how far people would go for what they saw as a greater cause. How far would you be willing to go for your beliefs? As England grappled with religious and political turmoil, it looked to the New World. While early expeditions like Roanoke ended in tragedy, the establishment of Jamestown in 1607 marked a new chapter in Britain's global ambitions. The colony's struggles and eventual survival paved the way for the 13 original colonies in North America, and these colonies would go on to play a crucial role in shaping the future of the United States. The colonization of the Americas wasn't just about seeking riches or land. It was driven by the desire to spread Christianity, a religious zeal that often clashed with the cultures and beliefs of the indigenous peoples. However, as the demand for crops like tobacco and sugar grew, the colonies evolved into profitable enterprises, and the British Empire soon found itself deeply involved in the transatlantic slave trade. It's hard to overstate the horror and inhumanity of this trade, where millions of Africans were forcibly transported to the Americas in appalling conditions. The ships were so cramped that people were packed together like cargo, often chained and unable to move. The human cost was staggering, and it lasted for over 300 years before slavery was finally abolished in the British Empire in 1833. This chapter in history should not just be seen as a dark part of the past, but as a lesson in the dangers of exploitation, the need for compassion, and the importance of human rights. The consequences of this practice, both for the enslaved individuals and the societies that profited from their labor, are still felt today. Meanwhile, in Ireland, tensions were rising. English and Scottish settlers were granted lands that had been confiscated from the Irish, leading to years of conflict and resentment. These plantations were part of a broader strategy to control Ireland, but they also had the effect of intensifying the cultural divide between the English settlers and the native Irish population. The struggles in Ireland during this period are a reminder of the dangers of forced assimilation and the long-lasting impact of colonial policies on indigenous cultures. As tensions boiled over in Britain itself, the English Civil War broke out in the 1640s. The conflict, fueled by disputes between King Charles I and Parliament, split the country into two factions: the Royalists, or Cavaliers, and the Parliamentarians, or Roundheads. The war ultimately led to the execution of King Charles I and the establishment of the Commonwealth under Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell's rise to power was a turning point in British history, one that demonstrated the power of organized resistance against absolute monarchy. But the Commonwealth didn't last long. Upon Cromwell's death, the monarchy was restored under his son, Charles II. This period of upheaval and restoration teaches us that change, while necessary, often comes with setbacks. But it also shows the power of compromise and adaptation, things we often forget in times of intense conflict. Charles II, however, brought with him one of the most significant cultural shifts in British society, the introduction of tea. Tea had been enjoyed in China for centuries, but it was the English aristocracy who truly embraced it in the 17th century. Soon, tea became a national obsession. This seemingly small detail in history is a perfect example of how global trade and cultural exchange shape our everyday lives in unexpected ways. Just think about it. Today, in nearly every corner of the world, tea is still enjoyed by millions of people. And it all started when a Portuguese princess, Catherine of Braganza, introduced it to the British court. By the late 17th century, Britain found itself at the center of another political struggle, this time with its monarch, James II. James, a Catholic in a largely Protestant nation, faced fierce opposition. When his daughter Mary and her Dutch husband William were invited to take the throne, they succeeded in what came to be known as the Glorious Revolution. This was a rare example of a bloodless overthrow of a monarch, one that reshaped the balance of power between the crown and parliament. But not everyone was happy with the change. In the Scottish Highlands, the MacDonald clan of Glencoe resisted the new monarchy, and for their disloyalty, 38 members of the clan were massacred. The massacre of Glencoe is a chilling reminder of the brutality that can arise from political and religious divides. As the 18th century unfolded, Scotland found itself in a period of both economic crisis and failed colonial ventures, like those in Nova Scotia and Panama. The union between England and Scotland in 1707 created the Kingdom of Great Britain, a significant shift in the political landscape of Europe. This union wasn't just political, it was economic, as both countries sought to pool resources and stabilize their economies. But as with all unions, there were growing pains. Yet, it was this union that allowed Britain to embark on its next great chapter, empire building. The 18th century saw Britain emerge as a global superpower, engaged in several European wars, most notably the War of Spanish Succession and the 7 Years' War. Victories in these wars led to new territories, especially in North America. However, the cost of these wars was staggering, and in order to finance them, King George III imposed heavy taxes on the American colonies. The result? The American Revolution. The 13 colonies, with financial support from France and Spain, fought against the might of the British Empire and emerged victorious. This rebellion wasn't just about taxation. It was about self-determination, liberty, and the right to govern oneself. It set the stage for the birth of a new nation, the United States of America, and forever altered the balance of power in the world. But as one empire faltered, another was rising. The British East India Company. Originally founded by Queen Elizabeth I, the East India Company became a powerful force in Asia, controlling vast territories and trade networks, particularly in India. However, the company's policies were harsh. In Bengal, for example, the governor, Robert Clive, ordered that opium be grown instead of food, leading to a devastating famine that killed millions. The company's actions provide a powerful lesson in the dangers of corporate greed and the disregard for human suffering. It's a stark reminder that unchecked power, whether by governments or corporations, can have catastrophic consequences. At the same time, British exploration was expanding into the Pacific. Captain James Cook arrived in New Zealand and Australia, territories that had been previously mapped by the Portuguese and Dutch. However, Britain was the first to lay claim to these lands, using them as penal colonies, with convicts sent to the newly established New South Wales in 1778. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in British expansion, one that would ultimately lead to the colonization of Australia and New Zealand. As Britain's empire stretched across the globe, new challenges emerged. The rise of Napoleon Bonaparte in France threatened to upend the balance of power in Europe. Napoleon's ambition, along with Britain's naval supremacy, would lead to one of the most intense military rivalries in history. But it wasn't just warfare that shaped this period. The shifting tides of empire building, colonialism, and revolution serve as poignant reminders of the complexities of power, culture, and identity, and how they continue to shape the world we live in today. In examining these events, we see a clear theme. History is not just about dates and figures. It's about the decisions we make, the people we become, and the consequences of our actions. Each of these moments in British history teaches us about power, how it's acquired, how it's wielded, and how it can ultimately shape the world for generations to come. Napoleon Bonaparte's rise to power and his domination of most of Europe in the early 19th century was a momentous event in history. His military genius and revolutionary ideas had reshaped much of the continent, but Britain, secure in its insular position as an island, held a distinct advantage. The Royal Navy, already a formidable force, played a pivotal role in ensuring Britain's survival against Napoleon's ambitions. Despite his brilliant strategies on land, Napoleon could never mount a successful invasion of Britain, a key reason why the British were able to withstand his efforts. The Battle of Trafalgar, for example, was a decisive naval victory that ensured British naval supremacy and was a crucial turning point in the Napoleonic Wars. Britain's ability to use its navy, not just for defense, but as a means of expanding its empire, was a defining feature of its rise to global dominance. By the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Britain had emerged victorious, but it wasn't just military prowess that had contributed to its rise. The economic and industrial factors were equally critical. In Ireland, however, things were far from rosy. The Great Famine, which struck Ireland in the mid-19th century, was a catastrophic event. A potato disease decimated the crop that the Irish relied on for sustenance. But the British response, or rather, the lack of response, was disastrous. Despite the widespread starvation, British policies forced the exportation of whatever food remained in the country, exacerbating the crisis. The population of Ireland fell by half due to death and mass emigration, particularly to the United States. This tragedy is a stark reminder of how political decisions can lead to devastating consequences for the most vulnerable. In the colonies, meanwhile, the British were also facing unrest. India, which had been under the control of the British East India Company, was becoming increasingly rebellious. The Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 was a significant uprising, driven by Indian soldiers, known as sepoys, who had grown disillusioned with British rule. The mutiny spread rapidly across northern India, but was ultimately quelled due to a lack of unity among the Indian forces. However, the rebellion was a major turning point, signaling the growing desire for independence in India. Following the rebellion, the British government took direct control of India, and Queen Victoria was declared Empress of India in 1876. This shift from company rule to direct imperial governance marked a new era in the British Empire's colonial ambitions. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, was a game-changer for both Britain and the world. This period of intense technological innovation transformed society, powered by new machinery, mechanization, and groundbreaking inventions. The steam engine, for instance, revolutionized transport and industry. Trains and railways allowed people to travel faster than ever before, reducing journey times from days to mere hours. This is the kind of shift that fundamentally alters the way we live and is still relevant to us today. Without the advancements of this era, our modern world might look unrecognizable. The telegraph, photography, the electric motor, each of these inventions fundamentally altered how humans communicated, worked, and connected. For Britain, the industrial boom triggered an unprecedented rise in productivity and urbanization. People flocked from rural areas to cities in search of work. While cities like Newcastle became hubs for shipbuilding, Manchester thrived as the center of the cotton industry. Liverpool emerged as a major trading port, and Middlesbrough turned into a steel and iron industry hotspot. The rise of these cities represented not just economic growth, but a new way of life. But this rapid urbanization also led to problems: cramped housing, pollution, and poor living conditions for the working classes. Yet these challenges also led to innovations in public health, such as improved sewage systems, which helped mitigate the effects of overcrowding. As the Victorian era progressed, society began to shift in other ways. For one, education became more accessible. Although the education system was still very strict by today's standards, it represented a step forward for many working-class families who could now access schooling. These changes would ultimately provide the foundation for greater social mobility, although inequality remained rampant. On a lighter note, the 1860s saw the rise of an iconic British food combination: fish and chips. Simple, hearty, and delicious, it remains a staple of British cuisine today. Yet as the empire expanded, tensions continued to rise. In South Africa, the British found themselves in conflict with the Boers, Dutch settlers who had established two independent republics, the Orange Free State and the Republic of Transvaal. The British attempted to assert control over these regions, leading to the Second Boer War. The Boer resistance, often using guerrilla tactics, made it difficult for the British to maintain control. In response, the British employed brutal tactics, including the establishment of concentration camps where women and children were confined. Tens of thousands died due to disease and starvation. The Boer War serves as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which empires will go to maintain control, and it left deep scars on the affected communities. By the early 20th century, Britain was deeply involved in World War I, a conflict that would redefine global geopolitics. The Great War, as it was known, saw the first widespread use of modern warfare technologies, including tanks, warplanes, machine guns, and chemical weapons. The British Empire, with its vast network of colonies, sent millions of men to fight in the trenches of Europe. The conditions were horrific, and the casualties were staggering. Many soldiers returned home shell-shocked, unable to escape the horrors of war. The war also contributed to the weakening of the British Empire, as it became increasingly clear that Britain could no longer maintain the same level of global dominance it once had. Despite this, Britain's territorial holdings reached their peak in 1921, after the First World War ended. At this point, the British Empire controlled over 400 million people and a quarter of the world's landmass. Yet, the cracks were starting to show. The cost of maintaining such an empire was astronomical, and the world was changing rapidly. Nationalism, especially in India and Africa, was growing stronger, and it was becoming clear that many nations within the empire were ready for independence. The Second World War would only hasten the decline of the British Empire. While Britain stood firm during the Battle of Britain and the Blitz, it became clear that the empire's days were numbered. The war had exhausted Britain, and many of its colonies began to demand independence. India, under the leadership of Mohandas Gandhi, famously embraced a strategy of non-violent resistance, ultimately achieving independence from British rule in 1947. India's success was a defining moment for the British Empire, signaling that colonial dominance was coming to an end. The post-war period saw the creation of the Commonwealth of Nations, a loose association of former British colonies. Today, the Commonwealth includes 53 countries that share a common history, language, and cultural ties. While the British Empire may have officially ended with the handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997, the Commonwealth remains as a symbol of the enduring legacy of Britain's colonial past and its efforts to maintain diplomatic and economic relations with its former colonies. The British Empire was responsible for both remarkable achievements and unspeakable atrocities. It contributed to the spread of modernity, trade, and innovation, but it also imposed its culture on millions and often exploited native peoples in the process. Globalization, as we know it today, has deep roots in the British Empire's expansionist policies, which connected disparate parts of the world in ways that were previously unimaginable. The story of the British Empire is complex, full of contradictions, but it is also a story of human ambition, progress, and ultimately, the push for self-determination. In the modern day, Britain is a multicultural society that continues to grapple with the legacy of its imperial past. From its impressive landmarks to its rich cultural traditions, each part of the UK retains a piece of its history. Whether it's the Welsh cake, the Scottish haggis, or the classic English breakfast, these foods tell the story of the cultural melting pot that Britain has become. And while the UK faces its own challenges today, including the economic consequences of the 2008 recession and the ongoing debates over its future relationship with the European Union, the lessons of history remain relevant. As we look back on the story of Britain, it's not just about remembering the past. It's about understanding how it shapes our present and future. The world we live in today is a result of the choices made by those who came before us, and the question we must ask ourselves is, what kind of legacy will we leave for the generations that follow? Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on Twitter. You can also support us on Patreon. Until next time.